So this is a journey that I call the Experiential Democracy Dialogue. I've been working on this for over a dozen years, and it's a one-on-one format. But more recently, over the last 3-4 years, I've been working with a group called Braver Angels, and I've become a trained moderator for Braver Angels, which is a national citizens group that now has over 10,000 members, and I believe they're in all 50 states. And basically, Braver Angels is a highly structured, supportive format for self-identified liberals and conservatives to come together to attempt to learn about and understand each other, as opposed to imposing views on each other. And through that process, enhance the possibility of attaining common ground. Now, I believe that Experiential Democracy Dialogue, which again is one-on-one, and Braver Angels, which is more of a group process, can complement each other. And I've been in a lot of discussion with my Braver Angels group about seeing ways that we can work together. I definitely see this webinar as one way of working together, because we actually have 2 Braver Angels who will be engaging in the demo that we'll be having momentarily, and that's Catherine McDonald and Carlos Hernandez. And I'll introduce them momentarily. This dialogue process also, as Sonia mentioned, draws from my recent book, The Depolarizing of America. Now, I feel quite strongly that this webinar is really introductory, and it's very important that folks who want to take this approach a next step and deepen it, really work with it, engage in more of these kind of webinars. I hope that others actually pick up the ball and foster these kinds of webinars, and that you read the book. I'm not trying to just give a raw sales pitch there. I really believe it's very important context to this introductory webinar. But I also do need to mention what I think is evident, but you know, I do receive some financial gain from the book, and that's something I need to state as a part of our continuing education format here. So this then is a chance for both therapists and non-therapists to try out skills that can help you to work with uncomfortable aspects of what you might call the other. In a sense, well, in terms of the focus of our work, we're establishing the other in terms of liberal and conservative, and we're going to have a range of topics, of quite charged topics, within that polarity that people can choose from. Now, Catherine and Carlos have already chosen the focus for them is going to be Donald Trump. So they decided to leap right into perhaps one of the most charged issues that we're now dealing with, along with the pandemic and racism and economic challenges. So this is a chance, as I say, for both therapists and non-therapists to work with the other side. And I feel it can be very helpful to therapists work with clients who differ from them ideologically, let's say, or for non-therapists who are dealing with people in their families and communities and schools, et cetera, maybe even in legislative situations where they're dealing with people who are on the very polar opposite side of their own perspective. Now, some of you, when you're paired up, will share similar, let's say, ideological or cultural stance of liberalism or conservatism. But this is a chance for you all to decide on who will be willing to role play that opposite side. And that can be very valuable in also in deepening one's ability to be present to the other. So the question has come up about, what is the sort of the cash value, the practical merit of these kinds of webinars, given how polarized our country currently is. And I have three basic answers for that. First is, overall, what is the alternative? Seems to me that one of the alternatives is that we continue to devolve into verbal flame throwing, which, as you all realize, is happening in our communities. It's happening especially in the political arena and through media of all kinds. Another alternative is to devolve, this is worst case scenario, into violence and war. And unfortunately, I fear, and I think many people fear, that we're closer to that situation than certainly in any sense comfortable at this point. A third alternative is to devolve into helplessness and despair. And I fear that that may be the state that most of us are in right now, just kind of sitting on our hands and not knowing what to do at all. So this is one approach I want to emphasize to addressing these quite distressing alternatives. And I have found, and folks in Braver Angels have certainly found, that the transformations can be quite moving. And if we get a chance, I hope we will get a chance, I'll elucidate some of the research that backs that up in terms of quite striking transformations that have occurred through these kinds of dialogue formats. So before I go into the introduction of our dialogue partners, I'd like to quickly go through the phases of the Experiential Democracy Dialogue. So anyway, so here you have first opening page. And now this is very important as context for the webinar. The ground rules, this is imperative for any of these kinds of dialogue formats, that we adhere to the ground rules. We've seen too many times in history, and I've seen personally, how quickly these kinds of charged encounters can devolve. And so these are our guardrails. We're here to understand and learn about each other, and not to impose our views on others or change their minds. As a result of this understanding process, again, that can create conditions for achieving common ground. Let's try to speak for ourselves and not speak for an outside group. We really want to keep this person to person. Stick to the spirit of the activities designed for each phase of the dialogue. And otherwise, it's pretty standard stuff we know, but needs to be underscored. Taking turns, not interrupting others when they're talking, listening, being respectful, no eye rolling or loud sighs. The nonverbal can be as powerful as the verbal in blocking this process. Attempting to just bring your best self to these dialogues, these phases. You'll take 2 minutes to set up and decide about who's going to represent liberal and conservative, and then you'll have these range of topics to choose from, and you can talk about them from the standpoint of your own perspective on dealing with the pandemic, racism, et cetera, or the election, et cetera, or that of society. And I believe Catherine and Carlos may be talking from both standpoints in terms of their focus on Donald Trump. So phase one, this is a way of priming the ground, tilling the ground. We've learned through quite a bit of experience with these things that it's important to set the tone by, first of all, just taking a collective breath, getting centered, and getting attuned to what it might be like just to sit with this other person. So we're asking dialogue partners to sort of dream into what are the thoughts, feelings, body sensations that come up as you envision sitting with this other. And then seeing if you can clear a space for the humanity of the other beyond the labels and the stereotypes and your immediate reactions. And then the second phase is getting to know even more about the person through the background phase, giving each person a chance to talk about what it was like to grow up, just in a nutshell, and how did their family system or culture treat the other, whatever that other is, who's the topic of conversation. So in the case of Catherine and Carlos, it may not be Donald Trump because he's obviously a new phenomenon, but somebody associated with Donald Trump, or perhaps a conservative candidate for president. That will be something you can determine in this particular phase. Phase three is, here's your chance now to describe as mindfully and heartfully as possible what your perspective is on the topic at hand. And the listening partner really needs to give you that space, try to be present, and help you to be present to bringing your whole self to this description. The listening partner also is then invited toward the end of that original speaker's description to reflect back what he or she heard, and the original speaker has a chance to correct any gaps in what the partner heard. Phase four, very important. This I imported from Braver Angels. This is a chance to identify, correct, and admit stereotypes. Again, these are more and more ways of filling out the whole human being, as opposed to the quick labels that we so quickly get trapped in. So for this, initially the speaking partner has a chance to identify, put on the table the ways they've been stereotyped by those critical of them. How they've felt reduced and labeled by those critical of them. Then they have a chance to correct the false and misleading aspects of how they've been labeled. And finally, they have a chance to acknowledge the nuggets of truth to the stereotypes. Again, a way of filling out the nuances of who they are, and also acknowledging perhaps some shortcomings, which can make them more accessible in the deepening of the dialogue with their partner. Number five is asking a question of the partner. And this is a chance to really try to come from this place of curiosity, respect, and openness. I mean, this is kind of the credo of our dialogue format. But especially coming from that place of curiosity, not a simple task, because we so often do come from presumption and a great deal of reactivity. So again, about centering oneself in honest wondering about how a person came to a particular view, or what it is that explains your perspective on this or that. And finally, the last phase is the discovery results phase, where each partner has 5 minutes to describe basically what they've learned. Did they feel heard by the other partner? Did they relate to the other partner's story, and very importantly, was there any common ground achieved? And what is this common ground? And is there perhaps any actionable common ground that they can take away from this dialogue process after it's over? Or maybe the idea of continuing on to deepen the dialogue more. This is my hope. This is my hope, along with the hope that these kinds of dialogue formats will really proliferate more and more in our country and maybe world. It seems to me that we're in desperate need of this very new movement within the democratic context. Otherwise, the alternative is, as my colleague Theopia Jackson puts it, frightening. So without further ado, then I'm going to introduce our dialogue partners, Catherine McDonald and Carlos Hernandez. And we're going to begin with the visualization stage because they've already chosen their topic. So Catherine and Carlos, if you could just both take a moment to center yourselves, take a nice full breath, and attempt to envision what it would be like momentarily just to sit with your partner, given the views that you're holding around Donald Trump, and what kind of thoughts and feelings come up for you. Just try to note those and let them go to the degree you can. And after acknowledging those, see if you can clear a space to see the fuller human before you, the person with their own story. So we'll give you 5 minutes for that. I'd like you both, Carlos and Catherine, now to focus on phase 2, which is the chance for you both to, again, talk about what it was like to grow up in a nutshell, and how your family system or your cultural system treated the other, in this case, someone related with Donald Trump, your topic of focus. So, Catherine, why don't we begin with you? And so you'll have about 5 minutes to talk about what it was like to grow up and how such a figure was treated, or you may need to speculate a little how Donald Trump would be treated in your family system. Why don't you go ahead and begin?
Okay. Well, I'm a San Francisco Bay Area native, and I grew up in Hillsborough. If anyone here is from the Bay Area, that's a pretty upscale community on the peninsula. So it was pretty affluent. Married parents there my whole life, so no divorce, and we all got a great education, went to good school systems, all ended up going to college, all through the state systems for the most part. UC, I went to UC Santa Barbara. As far as growing up in my family, the community I lived in and grew up in was very homogeneous. It was predominantly white. And I think as a kid, I don't recall having any particular conflict that I was super aware of as a child. I'm sure it was happening in the background and my parents had their concerns. I would say their social circle was predominantly white, though my dad was an attorney and my mom was a real estate agent after we got older and grew up. But I do recall there were people that came to our house to perform services, either babysitting or cleaning or gardening or whatever, that might have been from different groups ethnically. I do recall a judge coming to our house who was an African-American man. So I wasn't brought up with any sort of disparaging comments being made about people or ethnic groups, or men or women for that matter. So, and then as I got older, I don't think my parents were prejudiced or racist. I have had boyfriends across the years of different ethnicities, and so I would say my background was, what's the right word for it? It's pretty idyllic and not full of conflict. I mean, like, I think all marriages, they probably had their ups and downs, and I know they did. My mom died recently, and one of the last visits I had with her, as all the unrest was going on in different cities, there were the protests, but also the violence that was going on, and how Donald Trump was responding to it. I remember her sitting on the stairs and crying, what's happening to my country. She was really upset about it. But overall, I would say that they weren't disparaging. My dad was a Republican. I'm pretty confident my dad was a Republican. My mom might have even continued to be registered as a Republican. I've always been a Democrat. I think maybe when I was 18, I might have registered just what my parents were, but for the most part, I've been registered as a Democrat and voted Democratic. And I would say my father and I had our issues probably politically, and what was the right thing to wear or what I was doing with my life. We would have our arguments, but so he might have been more conservative than I was, and perhaps my mom was, though less so. But that's kind of my background, growing up with people other than Anglo white affluent people.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. I mean, you don't need to take the full 5 minutes if that feels pretty complete.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else to add at this point, but maybe it'll come out as I'm talking about the issue at hand.
Okay, and I did mean to mention that, Catherine, you're representing a liberal perspective.
Yes, correct.
Carlos is representing a conservative perspective. And,
Right.
and these perspectives, I should mention also, are very native to you, as you just mentioned, Catherine. So they're very, very genuinely expressed.
Correct.
Okay. So thank you. And so Carlos, would you describe for Catherine, basically what it was like for you to grow up within this general context, and how was, a Donald Trump-like figure treated in your family system? Carlos, do we have you?
He's muted. Carlos, you're muted.
I'm good. Me llamo Carlos Rafael Hernández. Soy un americano. And as an American, I want to take a short moment of silence. Yesterday was a sad remembrance of 9/11. Also victims of fire, displaced homes, COVID. So just a moment to recognize that. My name is Carlos Hernandez. I am the son, the oldest of two, of Rafael and Emilia. They're pictured behind me. I'm also an engineer by education from Stanford University. And as an engineer, I'm gonna reverse engineer the question. I'm gonna tell you, I don't have a classic upbringing as a conservative. Why? My folks were Democrats. I defected. And I won't say I defected from the Democratic Party. I defected from blueness. And I don't want to prejudice any blues from other states. My prejudice was generated by the city and county of San Francisco. 7 by 7 square miles, a population of 825,000, and they proudly claim to be the kingdom of blueness. What does that have to do with my parents? Well, they raised me as a Democrat, classic Democrat. They both worked in factories. That's where they met. And as a child, they were just Democrats. So that's what I figured I would be. And they raised me with the democratic values of those times. I was born in the late 50s. What did that mean? You believed in the American dream. And they did. They bought a home in 55, Daly City, paid for it in 2 years, $15,000 cash. 4 years later, and bought an apartment building in San Francisco, the American way. I was raised with the following value: we do not take handouts. My father was stubbornly proud of that fact, especially as a Hispanic. Heck, we didn't even get allowances. I wasn't paid to do chores. They were just expected. And the values that they were also then layered like a cake. Catholic Church values, the 10 Commandments from the Hebrew Scriptures, the 10 Beatitudes from the New Scriptures. The financial values were as follows. I wanted to go to high school with my friend, and it was a private school, Reardon High School. My mom said, great, you figure out how to pay for half. And I did. I've had a job since I was 10 years old. 10. Stanford, same deal. Carlos, you figure out how to pay for your tuition. To use a fancy term, personal agency. That's the way I was raised. I thought they were Democrat values. And I didn't flip until later in life. I was, again, raised the blue. I voted for Obama. I worked in his campaign. I voted for Willie Brown when he was landlord. I had interest in politics at a very young age. I don't know why. I used to watch the conventions in black and white when Walter Cronkite was on the air. I was just fascinated by politics. Again, I don't know why, but I just was. And that essentially is my path. Why did I flip? Curious minds ask. Again, in response to the policies, certain policies, as practiced by the Kingdom of San Francisco. And I was a small business owner, a landlord. And the rent control issues were the trigger point. So why did Trump become attractive to me? Simple. My mom always told me when I was a kid, do not let yourself get pushed around. She was pushed around as a dark-skinned Hispanic. You can't tell from the screen. I look like her, dark. No se deja is in Spanish. So when I was getting pushed around in this adult schoolyard of San Francisco, I needed someone to fight for me. And Mr. Trump was the guy. And I lived in New York for 10 years. I was not offended by his personality. In fact, I found it attractive. And I'll end with this. In New York, you'll say the F word to someone's face, and you deal with it right then and there. In California, my experience, and I was raised here, and I live here now, you tell someone behind their back. I like the kind of guy who walks up to me and says it to my face, and will deal with it right there and then. That's why I found him attractive. That's why I switched. Someone to fight in my corner.
Thanks so much, Carlos. And for you folks watching, I want you to try to envision these encounters one-on-one. I know that's not easy to do given the visuals here, but that's basically how this is designed, for Carlos and Catherine to be in an intimate space with each other, discussing these issues. So now we move to phase 3, which is basically describing your stances. And each partner will have 5 minutes to describe your stance. Roughly at close to 4 minutes, I'll ask the other partner to, oh, I'm sorry, at roughly 5 minutes, or depending on how long you need to describe your stance, I'll ask the other partner to reflect back what they heard, again, as mindfully and heartfully as possible. And then the original speaker will have a chance to correct any gaps in that reflection. So why don't we begin then with Carlos describing your particular perspective on Donald Trump to Catherine.
And the audience needs to please appreciate, Catherine and I have been friends for 10 years, and our friendship is strong. I don't think this session is might rattle the cage, but not end our friendship. One particular stance was immigration. As a Hispanic, now I was blessed to be born in the US of A. My parents were blessed to have been born here. They migrated. My father migrated from Texas. My mom did a reverse migration, born in San Francisco, raised in Tijuana, Baja California, Mexico. And imagine, I was 10 years old, and I found and saw a little credit card, but it wasn't a credit card. It was a green card. And it had my grandmother's picture on it. And I asked my mom, why is my grandmother's picture on this card and why is it green? Curious minds want to know. And she told me the process that her mother went through to become a legalized citizen of the United States of America. In my small business as a landlord, there was a legal issue, complicated, super complicated. And one of the issues was the legality of the tenant who signed a contract, possible fraud, possible having two identities, two social security numbers. So my parents never used the words rule of law, but it was about law and order. So when he came along with his immigration policy, I was all for it, all for it. And that was the particular policy and his stance that he took that made it, again, beside the anger that I cited earlier of why I found his position over the other Republican candidates from 4 years ago attractive. So I'll end my remarks with that.
Thank you. And Catherine, can you reflect back to Carlos what you heard?
Yeah, I heard that the primary issue in supporting Trump was his position on immigration and legal migration. That someone needs to go through the process to become a legalized citizen, and the respect for law and order, and Trump's general policies on immigration is what appeals to Carlos about Trump, mainly.
And Carlos, does that feel accurate to you? Or are there any gaps there that you'd like to fill
Yes. No, I feel that I feel heard.
Feel heard. Okay. Okay. Catherine, would you describe as mindfully and heartfully as possible your perspective on Donald Trump to Carlos?
My position on Donald Trump is that he's ill-suited temperamentally to be president and that he lacks the necessary leadership skills to execute on the office. I don't believe that him being a businessman or business person is enough of a qualification or a qualifying skill. I think understanding democracy and how a government is run is important, and not to mention a certain level of compassion for people. There are certain qualities that I feel like he possesses that are not admirable qualities, and I feel like he exhibits them all the time. I feel like he's overtly narcissistic, and that most everything that happens comes back to him if it's positive or is someone else's problem or something they did. He doesn't seem to take responsibility for his part in making a decision or not making a decision. I feel like he can be disloyal to people he brings into positions in the government. He wants them, he thinks they're wonderful, showers them with accolades, and then it switches and he's completely disloyal and speaks poorly of them. I feel like he's disrespectful of people in the way he treats them. I feel like he gets information and takes it out of context or it twists it into a lie. So the amount of lying that happens with him, I feel like I can't trust anything he says. He articulates things very poorly. So I feel like it has a very limited range as to how he articulates an issue or a topic or a problem. He behaves like a bully in a lot of cases. I would hope for a president that would have a wider thought process on issues at hand that would move us forward as a country. I feel like he regresses to old ways of doing things rather than taking the bigger picture and what might be possible in a bigger way so that the future is better for everyone. The fact that he denies the climate change that's going on, and the fires that we're experiencing now are just one of them, and the unrest that goes with all of that. And the fact that he's downplayed the virus from the get-go, where I feel like the amount of people that have died or been affected by COVID could have been diminished if the United States had acted earlier and taken it seriously and acted very strongly and put in guardrails to minimize what kind of impact it would have had. My general impression of him is that he comes from a place of negativity and that the future is dark. And I feel like the future can be bright. And I don't want to have our country led by someone that feels like the future is a dark place and only he can save us. I feel like it's a group effort. And so that's my impressions of him as a leader. I feel like the people he associates himself with predominantly have gotten accused of crimes and been put into jail. The staff turnover in his administration has been enormous, that people come, people go, there's no stability, so there's no continuity to policies and how things are executed on. The disrespect that he apparently has for people that have served in the military, I think that's a really tough job. That and policing are very tough jobs, and the way he purportedly has spoken about them with the level of disrespect, I have a hard time with. The name calling and the lying about a lot of people. So there's so many levels but I think it all boils down to his temperament and his lack of vision and his lack of compassion and his ability to communicate that are what I have problems with him. I don't see him as a leader. So that's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Carlos, could you reflect back? I know there's a lot of layers there, but as best you can, kind of reflect the essence of what you're hearing from Catherine on her perspective on Trump.
Here's my humble attempt to unpack a stovetop. Stovetops have usually 4 burners. So 3 pots, 3 big pots. 1 pot, aspects of personality. 2nd pot, aspects of behavior. 3rd pot, aspects of judgment. And since I'm using a cooking metaphor, the 3 pots hold things that don't look good, don't taste good, and don't even, look and taste. So who's going to want to take anything out of any of those three pots to eat and consume? So that's my summary of what I heard.
Okay. Catherine?
Oh, one thing, Kirk, I do want to add one thing. Because I am an engineer, I think in scales, rulers. The trust scale is from 0 to, let's say, 10. The grade on the trust scale is in line with the three pots, very low, very low. In fact, maybe even 0.
Catherine, does that feel accurate to you, or is there more that you'd like to fill out about what you're attempting to express?
I feel like it's accurate. The other layer that is how that impacts his judgment and the choices he makes and the decisions he makes, and how that ends up affecting all of us as citizens of this country. So yeah, but I would say that the trust level is very low, and how he's presented on all those pots is not palatable.
Okay, and I just want to check back in to make sure that you both feel basically heard by each other. Do you feel like you've been able to, in some sense, step into the shoes of each other with your perspectives here? Or?
I think so.
Mm-hmm. I give thumbs up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, good. So let's go on to phase 4, which is the stereotype exercise. And so let's begin with Catherine, and you'll have 7 minutes each. You don't need to take that amount of time, but you have that. So Catherine, if you could begin by identifying the stereotypes of your position from people who are critical of you or your position, and basically the way you felt and feel labeled and reduced to stereotypes at this point.
Let's see. So stereotypes of my position that I just expressed, correct?
That's right.
There might be a stereotype of that it's maybe too much based on an emotional perspective rather than tangible policies. Or like how you can govern just from an emotional level, so that it's inoperable so stereotypes, or maybe it's just a liberal perspective, and I'm having a hard time with this one, Kirk.
It's okay. So how are liberal perspectives, criticized or labeled in your experience?
Yeah, or just that they're perhaps unrealistic, or how you can apply that to policy that is fair for the general population, maybe, or that it's too liberal for some people. Mm-hmm. So
okay.
That's all I can come up with right now.
Okay. All right. So now you have a few minutes to correct these labels of being too liberal or emotional. I mean, you mentioned a number of themes that mm-hmm. you felt tagged by. So okay. How do you correct the false and misleading aspects of that?
I think most people want to come at something from a position of fairness, and how one feels about something impacts the decisions they make and how they live.
Well, can you say more personally how you feel these labels are misleading or incorrect toward you personally?
Okay. Perhaps that it's just impractical, or it's maybe from I'm coming from too emotional a level. And how I correct that? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, yeah. How would you correct that?
Um,
What's the problem with that?
I think for me, there's a lot of examples of where emotion and fairness come into play, and for me personally, and how it plays out in how our government acts. I mean, the civil rights movement and the current civil rights movement, and the one in the 60s, I'm not sure how I would correct that. I mean, it's my position, so I feel like it's the right position, but and I feel like coming from an emotional place of fairness is a good place to come from. So I don't know how I would correct that, really.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're giving some corrective feedback just in those statements. So finally, would you then identify nuggets of truth to the stereotypes that are put on you for your liberal position for Carlos?
I'm sure there are. I don't know if I could specify which ones. I often feel like there's always some middle ground that you can come to, where you can come from an emotional position or you can come from a pragmatic position. And I feel like there's a place where the two can overlap. And so maybe that's where the nuggets of truth lie. Where if people are on the farther ends, there is a middle ground somewhere. And I feel like that's possible. So I'm sure there's a nugget of truth where you can be too emotional or too impractical. And there's a position where you can be so practical and not take into consideration how people feel or how it's going to affect their lives, that there's got to be some middle ground. And that's partly why I participate in the groups that I'm in.
Okay. I don't know if you can do this, but can you specify for you what that nugget of truth is to the stereotype? Like a very quick example for that, where you represent that nugget of truth to the stereotype?
I guess just from the empathy standpoint, I mean, perhaps just the empathy I feel for people that are being impacted, be it people of color or what have you, with the injustices in our system. I mean, that's, so maybe there's a practical part of that. So maybe that's the nugget of truth for me.
It's impractical sometimes?
Perhaps, yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. Carlos, can you then begin with identifying the stereotypes that have been imposed on you by people critical of you or your perspective?
Yes, and I will acknowledge it's easier to go second. So Kathy, I have empathy.
It's not easy. Yes.
Not easy, so pick on me next time first, so it's fair to her. Anyway, yes, we can rotate. The stereotype, my stereotype is colored by two essential realities of my life. Math-orientated, science-orientated, engineer in training, and 20 years in the business world. So I come from that silo. Therefore, the stereotype that I have, is that an equation a process solves all problems. Some might call that rigid thinking. Others might take the position, oh, that's linear thinking.
That's what?
Or someone, linear type thinking. Linear.
Oh, linear. Okay. Yeah,
And someone who could even jump up and down and say, whoa, Carlos, that's silo type thinking. You live in a silo. So that's a stereotype I have of myself and quote unquote our side. I'll anticipate your next question.
okay.
The nuggets of truth.
Well, that's the next question is actually, can you correct the stereotypes?
Yes. Yes.
Fill that
Because
out.
I say that because I'm human, and I have the potential to change. And I'm going to quote a pope from the 1950s. Maybe it was, well, I won't guess the name. He purportedly said, the longest journey we'll ever take is from the mind to the heart. The longest journey. The longest journey. And in line with that, the ethos of your institute is about inner search.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's possible. Absolutely, it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, highly probable for most of the population.
And for you, you're saying?
Yes. I happen to subscribe to the notion of, I'll come out of my closet. I pay people like yourselves to see every other week, and I have for a long time. So.
Okay. Oh, appreciate your candor.
Thank you.
So the third part of this, the nuggets of truth to the stereotypes imposed on you.
The aspect, and I don't want to use the words I'm about to use because they're charged, but the historical reference has been black-white thinking, or to be less color-focused, polarized thinking, diametrical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you admit to doing that at times.
That's a big 10-4. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you both very much. This was not an easy piece to do, and yet it feels like a very vital part of this. Phase 5, we could move on to another pretty challenging point here, which is to ask a question of each other, a question that comes from, again, as much as you can, a space of curiosity, of wonder, honest wonder about the other's position. And so why don't we begin with Carlos asking Catherine a question that you wonder about, that seems to kind of summarize a number of questions perhaps that you have about her position as best you can.
And Kathy does have an advantage here, given our 10-year friendship, with specific reference to the property which I formerly owned.
Yes.
How do you legislate something that is fair to both the landlord and the other? And the other would be called a tenant, with a dose of compassion. How do you do both? Especially in San Francisco, where it's so heavily slanted in the blueness.
What I would say is, from a pragmatic standpoint, I feel like you need to have fair laws on the books. and that might be hard to define sometimes, what is considered fair, but fair laws on the books and then actually enforce them. I feel like a lot of policies and issues happen when there's no oversight, there's no enforcement, there's no checks and balances. So you have policies on the books, but then there's no following of the policies. And I think in the case of what I know about your apartment complex issue, there was a lease that the city and county of San Francisco didn't enforce. So, and as things evolved, it got worse and worse in that particular unit, and the government wasn't enforcing what the lease originally said. So I think there's for me, it's fair policies and then checks and balances with compassion. So that's what I feel is often lacking, either in the city and state or at a federal level, is things get funded, it goes out of control. There's no organization to make sure that someone qualifies for some sort of financial support, actually still continues to qualify for it. Is there a department that handles that kind of thing? So for me, there's sort of a pragmatic point where there's checks and balances that actually get enforced and followed.
Okay, thank you. And if we were to do this in a more naturalistic setting with more time, you'd have the chance to ask some follow-up questions, but unfortunately we don't have that time now. So I'd like to switch roles, and if you, Catherine, could ask Carlos a question that you wonder about in terms of his position on Trump.
Okay, yeah. My question for Carlos is, what are your hopes for Trump should he be reelected?
And again, because I know you for 10 years, I don't know much about Melania. But Melania, if Melania had doses of your personality, and by the way, audience, we have nicknames for each other, which will remain anonymous, because I think the wife plays a huge role. Nancy Reagan was like that. It's purported that one of the Russian leaders asked his ambassador to talk to Nancy to influence Ron Reagan. This story came via Schultz. And Nancy had the fortitude to tell the ambassador, do it yourself. At the same time, Nancy was a huge influence on Ronald Reagan. Huge influence. Huge influence. We never know about the roles of the first ladies. With the exception of Michelle Obama. So, yeah, that the position must be awfully lonely to bear the weight of leading this country and also its role in the world. Huge responsibility. I have no idea what it's like to be in his shoes. I have a tough time for myself. So, can't do it alone. Can't do it alone. That's my response.
Okay, thank you. So let's take a breath here and move on to our last phase, the dialogue, which is the discovery results phase. And again, we don't need to take 10 minutes, but in the interest of time, maybe we can take a little less time, actually. But do convey whether you feel heard by your partner. Do you relate to your partner after this exercise? Basically, what have you learned from these 5 phases that you've worked through? And very importantly, was there any common ground achieved? or potential for common ground, a sense of resonance about something, and maybe something that you could even take steps toward extending in some way, together or separately. So let's begin with Carlos then, in regard to what you discovered, Carlos, from this exercise.
What I've learned, and going back to my kitchen stove metaphor, is the use of seasonings to make something taste better. And the seasoning's called compassion. I love that. I also love the other seasonings you pulled off the table, out of the shelf. The seasoning called verification. I like that. I like that a lot. Those are two key seasonings one can pull off the shelf to compose a policy. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you. And Catherine, can you summarize your learning, your discovery from this encounter?
Well, I did feel heard, and it felt good to be able to totally voice how I feel about him in a very non-volatile environment. I understand his frustration and his position as it relates to his business and immigration. So the part I really relate to is the unfairness of the way things worked out for him, for his small business, for Carlos's small business. So, so I think the common ground is actually fairness. What's fair, and figuring that out. What's fair for most people? What's right? And how that plays out in our laws. Were there any other areas that we were covering in this slide? Kirk?
Yeah, just whether you see any actionable steps based on what you've discovered about each other, something you'll take away with you.
Well, we've been friends a long time and we talk almost daily, and I think the topic will be easier for us to discuss with each other because of this. I don't think I've actually expressed to Carlos the depth of my loathing. And I think on some level I was able to, as why, the things that I see that impact that. And I feel like you always have a way forward when there's dialogue. So, because I want to hear his position, and sometimes it can get heated or emotional, but I just feel like I'll know him better and he'll know me better. And whether we agree or not is less of the issue. It's the hearing of each other that I feel like is the nugget, and the element of fairness for both sides, not just the immigrant and not just the business person, but so on. Just using his example.
Thanks. Carlos, anything to add about actionable steps at this point?
Well, here's the good news for the audience. We're not starting with this conversation. Kathy joined Braver Angels over 2 years ago and was constantly pitching me to join. I finally did. I drank the Kool-Aid, and I've been heavily involved with Braver Angels. In fact, as of 2 weeks ago, I'm on their national leadership team. Now, how about that? Brown and red on the table. And we're heavily involved, both her and I. So, and that's how we met you, Kirk. So to be selfish, I'm going to pitch to the audience, consider tasting the seasoning called Braver Angels. Yeah.
Well, thank you deeply, both of you for your courage and your pioneering, really, of this perspective, and your support of others who are groping with this process and maybe yearning to attempt to even just be present to another who represents a completely different position, aside from the potential for bridge building. But I feel that you've exemplified it in an exemplary way. So thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Standing by, ready to respond to your questions, reflections about what you just experienced. Catherine and Carlos are both here to respond as well.
Hi, I was just wondering how you guys felt at that beginning part where you're supposed to visualize and having the conversation with the other person, and if it was any different from what you imagined.
I can go.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm used to meditation, so I sort of took it as a meditative time to just feel whatever compassion I feel for Carlos. So I felt like it was a really great starting point for me to calm and connect with myself, as well as connect with Carlos as another human being with feelings, and just focus on that. It just helped calm me.
A couple things very good. These questions about stereotyping, I felt were very difficult for the two participants to answer, because it involves, and I think it's probably true for everybody, it involves looking at yourself and reflecting on your own position and thinking very clearly about its limitations. And I wonder what Kirk would say about that, because you know, this is where I would see that it's most important but hardest to really make progress, because that's not an easy thing to do, to look at yourself and say, my position has these holes, or has these stereotypes, or has these limitations. So, and I also felt like it's tough also to ask a question, the next one, I think it was the next one, ask a question and get a reflective answer. You know, the question, what do you want to know about Trump? From your perspective, that one about the laws and what do you expect from Trump? Somehow that didn't give me as much more as I was hoping it would. So anyway, I just thought, where are these typically where the difficulties in this process occur?
Yeah, good questions. Actually, I've found the stereotype exercise being expressed pretty readily by folks that I've worked with, especially in the Braver Angels format and the group format.
Okay.
Maybe a little tougher on the one-on-one, and I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's the extreme focus on each person, and there's a little bit more intensity about personally responding to that. The groups seem to do it pretty quickly. They can run off 8-10 stereotypes pretty quickly, maybe because it's diffused among everyone, so not as heavy. But you know, Carlos or Catherine could elaborate if they want on that. But
Carlos would. Tom, I acknowledge that. And in Braver Angels, there's someone like Kirk. He's a psychologist, specialist in marriage family therapy. He designs our workshops. And when we tackle stereotypes, the blues are in one circle, the reds are in the other. So there's safety in numbers. And even the most scared red or blue gets to hear the other 8 people go first. So all of a sudden, the individual is less afraid to throw themselves under their own bus.
Okay.
I also think there's a deepening process to this. and that in more naturalistic settings, if you can take the time, if you have the luxury of time, you can take more time to reflect on these difficult questions, to settle into them a little more. It's tough when you're on the spot like this.
Sure.
And I would say answer it too, in that it is actually tough because there are so many stereotypes on both sides. And which one are you going to pick? And what are you talking about at the time that's going to apply to what you're picking as a stereotype? So it could be a longer conversation, like what the stereotypes are and how they apply to what you're talking about at the time.
Yeah, I also think it was harder for you because yours was like about character and temperament, not about policy. And that's a harder one to define the stereotype about.
Yeah.
Good point.
Kirk, if I may, I want to add another perspective since the audience is a group of mental health specialists.
Well, it's mixed. It's both therapists and non-therapists.
Okay. I have lots of friends who are Reds, who are afraid when they come to your respective offices, when they learn how blue you are.
Oh.
And they're handing you a check for $135 and they're scared. They're scared to tell their truth. Yeah, trust me, they exist. You can interview them if you want. I'll bring them forward.
You know, I've gotten that sense from Braver Angels as well, that there is a lot of on the red side in particular, especially in our environment. Yeah.
I'll add this. I know someone. I won't mention their gender. I'll call the individual a they. The they is a student at the Wright Institute in Berkeley. She could not get an internship in the Bay Area. She had to go out of state because I speak. So it's in your community too. Let me tell you.
Yeah. I'm curious if each of you truly identify yourselves as conservative and as liberal, and how it is you do that. Is it a social grouping that you feel most comfortable with? Is it an emotional thing or an intellectual thing?
For me, it's partly, who I vote for. I mean, since that's the way it's often defined, is who I vote for and who I agree with politically and who I feel like policies align with my values. So are they showing compassion? Are they showing respect? Are they suggesting policies and laws that respect people and are fair and also practical? So that's politically how I identify myself. I think I do have probably more liberal friends, which can be an echo chamber, I suppose, but I do have red friends too. I mean, Carlos is one of them. He's a very close friend. And I do have other friends that are red, so they're not exclusively, but to me, it's around values, and not every value is going to be the same. So Carlos and I definitely share some values, and then other values we probably don't share. But that's how for me, it seems to play out.
And for me, I cannot and will not compare myself to George Will, for example. I'm a latecomer to the game. But here it was easy to do. As someone who lives in San Francisco, it's not that hard to find friends that are blues. And they would presume my blueness because I was Hispanic. And they would just open their mouths and say what they would say. And that became less attractive to me. And I would have to call across the country to friends where the conversations were more comfortable. And they became even more comfortable inside of Braver Angels. So The blues, in their hubris, in my opinion, hubris, presumptuousness, because I was dark, that I think like them, made it really easy to identify with the other side.
I see these formats as one way of doing that, gradual immersion into some of the unsettlements that come up around speaking to the other. And let's not forget, the other is the other in oneself, as well as the other, the other. So there's there can be quite a bit of discomfort with these kinds of dialogues. We want to manage those as well as possible, but I don't think we can block them out if we're going to make progress as a collective in living with each other, and not just living with each other, but thriving, hopefully, through discovery about ourselves.
Kirk, may I add something, please?
Yes.
And this is, again, is coming from the 12-step environment.
Yeah.
One of the biggest tools is what's called a fear inventory. And it's not done alone. In the 12-step programs, the individual, doesn't matter which program, does it in conjunction with the sponsor. It's not done alone. So I want to acknowledge the Ray's point.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard work. Hard work.
That's true.
Extremely hard work.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you reinforcing that. I think we all need to hear that. It's not a simple process. Okay. I'd like to bring your attention to the ground rules very quickly. I'm going to go back to those. So again, if you would take a quick look at the ground rules and just try to absorb them the best you can, to work within them. Okay, so what I'd like you to begin with is your setup stage, and this is a chance to decide on which role you're going to take on. And for some of you, again, it will be very native to you to take on a liberal role or a conservative role, and perhaps you would have that that duality within your dyad. But many of you may have the same orientation, so to speak, overall. So I think that's a great chance for one of you to attempt to embody the other side. And this is also a chance for therapists to maybe think about how some of their clients are oriented, ideologically or culturally. It's a chance for non-therapists to think about people in your life, maybe close people who are oriented in a very contrasting way from you, and to see if you can experience to the degree possible what you sense they're experiencing, coming from their perspective. And then choose a topic. We've got suggested topics here. You don't have to stay within them, but we prefer you do. And why don't we just begin this stage right now? So you'll have 2 minutes to decide, and then we'll come back out. So I'm assuming everybody has chosen their topic. And now I'd like you to begin with phase 1, visualizing the dialogue. Take about 3 minutes to, again, check in with what you're feeling, sensing, thinking about connecting with that partner on the particular topic you're going to discuss. And after that, take a couple of minutes to get a feel for the more of that partner. Get a feel for their humanity beyond the simple category or label that might have first come to mind in regard to that partner. the background phase. So you'll each have 5 minutes to describe basically what it was like growing up in your family system, and how did your family system or culture view the issue that you're focusing on. Okay, so let's begin that for a total of 10 minutes, and then we'll reconnect. Welcome back, everyone. And now we're ready to go to phase 3, which I'll share on the screen here momentarily. Now, this is a chance for each of you to describe your stance. And I encourage you, again, to try to come from a place of a sort of whole body expression in terms of your stance. You know, not just reporting distantly about it, but see if you can bring your feeling, bring your body into it to the degree you can, so that your partner gets a fuller sense of where you're coming from. So you'll have 5 minutes respectively to describe your stance, and then 2 minutes for your partner to reflect back what they heard, and for the original speaker to correct any gaps in that reflection. So let's begin now. You have a total of 14 minutes. Okay, so we want to move now to phase 4, which is the stereotype exercise. So each partner is going to have 7 minutes each to, to convey to the other partner initially how they've been stereotyped, how they've been labeled by people critical of them. And then they'll have 3 minutes to talk about the false and misleading aspects of those labels and how they've felt reduced by those labels. So again, filling out more of your humanity. And then the final part of this phase is identifying the nuggets of truth to the stereotypes. Really trying to go humble at that point as much as you can, and be real about how you may have gone off the rails in some ways. Okay, and then of course you switch roles. So let's begin this phase right now. Phase 5, we could move on to another pretty challenging point here, which is to ask a question of each other, a question that comes from, again, as much as you can, a space of curiosity, of wonder, honest wonder about the other's position. Okay, welcome back, everyone. And let's move right on to the final phase, where it's a chance to talk about basically what you learned from the experience, what you discovered, and whether there was any room for common ground or common action. Even. welcome back to everyone. Maybe we should all just take a breath and get more present to our large arena here. Sorry about the time situation, but I hope this gave you a decent taste of what could be a deeper and a more expanded process for you and maybe in your community.